Good afternoon. This is Media Center Ukraine, Odesa, and we continue with the briefing dedicated to development of the Ukrainian language in the Odesa region. Our speaker is Yaroslava Riznykova, the head of the Odesa Regional Department of Culture, Nationalities and Religions of the Odesa Regional Military Administration. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us today. Let's start with the programs for the development of the Ukrainian language in the Odesa region, and what are the regulations protecting Ukrainian language. And the language issues are always in trend, and those who believe that language is not important is under 300-year influence of first of the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union, and now the Russian Federation committing military crimes on our territory using language to promote its ideology. The existence of various documents forming our legislative field allowed to develop the ecosystem of the Ukrainian language are very important. If we look in the history related to the existence of the Ukrainian language on the territory of the independent Ukrainian state and Odesa in particular, I would like to say that for quite a long time we used the Soviet legislation when it came to the language, and only in 2000s we saw first changes, and first they were rather unsuccessful. For example, the law on the basics of the development of Ukrainian language promoted by back then President Yanukovych that had a negative effect on the Ukrainian language in general in Ukraine and in the Odesa region in particular. The Russian language was supported back then. Also, it was not endangered, and it had a very quick result for schools, because 33 new Russian classes emerged, even in those schools where no Russian language was taught before. And that affected the general language situation in Ukraine. Only with 2014, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, we saw other decisions. In 2014, in the Odesa region, 51% selected Russian language as the main language of learning for their children. But in 2015, we saw the changes in the percentage of Ukrainian language classes. In 2018, 83% of children, as stated by Lena Buynevich, wanted to learn in Ukrainian language. That's why regulations and programs are very important. In 2021, the state adopted the concept of the state program to support Ukrainian language, but unfortunately, we still have only a concept. There is no real program developed. But thanks to the civic organizations and also the Commissioner on Ukrainian language, Taras Kremin, we see emerging of such programs in different cities and regions. And the Odesa region was not the last to adopt the relevant program. It happened on the 20th of December in 2022. And the program envisaged allocation of a bit more than 1.5 million hryvnias for 3 years. And of course, because of the war, we have decreased this amount. We just left those activities that have the biggest influence, the biggest impact. And we also involved the civil sector in the process and the possibilities of local authorities. In particular, we continue supporting publishing of books of local authors about the Odesa region, about the history of Ukraine. 100 hryvnias have been allocated for that. We also will continue providing funds for a very important project as Ukrainian cinema under the open sky. We also will continue financing meetings with the leading writers. That's how we involve all these aspects: language potential, literature potential, and we also stir up the interest to Ukrainian literature in general. Of course, such projects should be implemented by different spheres of our society, by public authorities and civil societies. And here we have a well-established concept with our activists and representatives of the Commissioner on Protection of State Language, and we can see the first results of such cooperation. The Commissioner on Protection of the State Language organized survey in the Belgrade rayon or district. A lot of violations were identified, and Taras Kremin addressed the head of Odesa Regional State Administration, Oleg Kiper, and offering to develop new programs at the local level. And we have seen a good response, and we have already introduced programs in Volgrad, Tarutino, Artsiz, and it is still under development and will be adopted soon. We can see similar results for other districts of our region. We will accumulate information and we will continue our discussion having more background and more facts. We hate to have quite an interesting situation when it comes to the state language and national minorities languages, because Odesa is one of the most polyethnical regions of Ukraine. And there is the survey of the Foundation of Democratic Initiatives. That survey was conducted in October 2022. And generally in Ukraine, 82% of people believe that Ukrainian is their native language. Then in Odesa region, this is 53.7%, so the difference is almost 25%. And only 10% all over Ukraine believe that Russian language is their native language, but in the territory of the Odesa region, this is around 30%. And there are also other languages all over Ukraine. This is 1.5%, but for Odesa is 5.4%. And this is well correlated with the census in our region. Almost 37% of our citizens do not represent the title nation. Of course, we take this in consideration in our work when we develop regulations, different acts, and also for the developing of the network for educational institutions, including preschool education. Out of 79 secondary education institutions, 17 schools have classes where children can learn languages of national minorities. And this information is according to our Ministry of Education. And in general, there are 13 schools with Moldovan language. three schools that this year have switched to the Romanian language, and one school with the Bulgarian language as the main language of learning. There are also many schools in the city of Odesa and in the region of Odesa where people can learn different languages, starting with Italian and just like ending with Chinese language. And it is a very interesting novelty in our legislation. There is the public discussion of the draft law of the regulation of the cabinet ministers of Ukraine to establish methodology for using languages of national minorities and communities of Ukraine in the settlements which are traditional for representatives of national minorities. This draft regulation follows the law of Ukraine on the national minorities of Ukraine and also the order of the President of Ukraine. Last week, we met with the representatives of different national and cultural communities and associations to discuss this draft regulation. And we learned a lot of interesting details from them, and the state service on the relevant policy and the freedom of conscience of Ukraine, which is an initiator to develop this draft law, promised to take into consideration all concerns and all comments. Why is it important? Such methodology provides a layout for us how to use languages of national minorities in the communities of national minorities, taking into consideration how long they stay on the territory of Ukraine. So now the period is 100 years. And as usually, this raises heated debates because some people say that we need to take 200 years, 500 years of residing on the territory of Ukraine. Others say that we should not focus on the period of residence, but every regulatory act is a certain consensus in the society, taking into consideration different approaches, and I think that we'll find compromise in this situation as well. This is important for us to understand how to organize the document management, what language should be used by communities and by authorities, what signs can be there. So this is a very interesting document, and I would like to invite everyone who is listening to us now to be involved in this discussion. So please just visit the website of the State Service on the freedom of consciousness, and please be involved in the process because this is very important for the future of our country. And last week, this studio was visited by Yaroslava Riznykova, the representative of the Commissioner on the Protection of the State Language. Odesa is among three countries when it comes to the amount of claims with regard to use of the state language. But I can agree with Yaroslava here because this is not about the number of violations, but about the willingness of citizens to deal with these issues. And a small clarification. In this studio, Yaroslava mentioned that the biggest claims received from the higher educational institutions. Unfortunately, this is really so, and we also monitor the situation. We work with the representative of the Commissioner on the State Language of Ukraine because she has the possibility to get all information to work on these issues. We know about these cases and we try to respond. We discuss these topics with the teachers, if these claims are related to the activities of the Department of Culture of the State Regional Odesa Administration. So we usually try to explain the importance of learning of the state language and also the importance of understanding the understanding of the importance of following the Ukrainian language, the Ukrainian legislation. We know that our language is our weapon, and Ukraine cannot exist without Ukrainian language. What about officials? Do they follow the requirements of the law? Do they meet the requirements? And there was the survey organized by Ms. Yaroslava Riznykova, and unfortunately, for example, in Belgrade Rayon, not all officials meet the requirements. And also, they warned about the fact that they should meet the requirements of the law. And also, this is the part of our regional program that strictly says that it is important to work with the public officials and self-governance bodies for the Ukrainian language, which is defined as single state language. And we should say here that Ukrainian citizens are not obliged to know other languages. They can speak other languages. They can use other languages in their work and in their everyday life. But our citizens are only obliged to speak the state language. This is what we try to explain to everyone. To improve the language knowledge among population and in particular among officials in the south of the Odesa region. And you know that the amount of nationals increase from the south from the north to the south, and so this is 80 to 18%. To compare different regions on the north and on the south. And there are some difficulties with the traditional use of the Russian language. So to rectify the situation, we'll also take into consideration requests, claims, and also proposals of activists. And the survey that I have already mentioned today has shown that when it comes to the question of what methods of learning of the Ukrainian language do you consider the most viable, then, for example, in Ukraine, all over Ukraine, people believe that courses up to 20%, but in Odessa, 40% of people believe that courses are the best approach. That's why we have decided to develop the network of language courses of different formats and different types. And I'm really happy that the Odesa region is the initiator to establish the Association of Language Courses, allowing to unite language courses not only in Odessa or in the south of Ukraine, but all over Ukraine. This is our objective. And we have already more than 100 courses, and we're happy to receive information that new courses are still opened or some literature discussion clubs in Ukrainian language. And what is the age category of people attending these courses? Different ages. They are the courses for the University of the Third Age. So these are the elderly people who want to communicate in Ukrainian language. The courses under umbrella of universities, the courses organized by NGOs for adults, for middle-aged people who try to find new possibilities for employment and understand that they need to know Ukrainian language at a higher level. And usually such courses are opened in the premises of libraries or other cultural institutions. People can communicate and speak Ukrainian language there while attending different workshops, for example. And this is the so-called soft Ukrainization of our population. And I think that we will have a progress, and people will understand how important and how easy it is to learn Ukrainian language. One more question about religious organizations of Odesa. Do they meet the requirements of the language law? This is a difficult question. It is not well examined. Thank you for focusing on it, because usually people forget about this, although it is very important for the security of Ukraine in general and safety and security of the border regions. I can share my personal experience when communicating with representatives of different confessions, and we have more than 60 of them, different denominations, and we can see the increase of these organizations every year, and we can see that they use Ukrainian language more now. And for example, in 2014, there were a lot of religious communities having their sermons in the Russian language, the leaders of the Protestant movement, and this was related to some canon texts that should be translated. And since 2014, we have information that they learn Ukrainian language more. Also, many of them continue using the Russian language. Of course, the Orthodox Christian Church of Ukraine uses the Ukrainian language, and representatives of national minorities use languages of minorities in the community. And this is clear because you should address God speaking the language that you know and that you understand and that you can feel. Do you have any claims about sermons in the Russian language? We have not received any. We just examined the question, the issue, and it was interesting for us to understand what languages are used for these ceremonies. When it comes to the violation of the language law, which district in the Odesa region is most problematic? I cannot answer this question. I think that the commissioner on the language, of the state language, should conduct surveys in different areas of the Odesa region. We will be able to get this information. We will be able to calculate the numbers basing on the numbers of claims and with regard to violation of the Ukrainian language, and also the fines that will be imposed. Now we work with different areas of the Odesa region, with different raions. So we explain the legislation and how it should be implemented. So the work is ongoing, and at the end of the year, we will prepare the document containing the information about the results of our joint activity and the implementation of the program aiming at supporting the Ukrainian language. And after that, we will be able to present results at the briefing. And I can make a conclusion that the biggest amount of problems can be seen in the south of Ukraine. Yes, in the northern areas, Ukrainian is native language for most people, but in the south, people can face some issues. And we can see the biggest amount of questions among elderly people. It is difficult for them to switch to another language. It is not needed because they are already pensioners. But younger people, the graduates of schools and universities, don't face any language barrier. And I hope that in the next decade, there will be no language barriers at all. There will be no even thoughts about not knowing, not speaking Ukrainian language. Yaroslava Riznykova, thank you very much for visiting us today, and we will continue at 3 p.m.